Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet another trek through Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. We're on Volume 19, Chapter 13, and we are done. 13 and extra, that is it. As I always say, I don't check chapter counts and whatnot. I get a rough idea where the images are, but I don't know exactly how many chapters there are, so it's always technically a surprise to myself whenever I actually finish it. But yes, decent set of chapters. Thankfully I don't think I'll be crying that much in this Mushoku Monday, and that's good because coming up here soon we have, well, it's going to be after you guys watch this, but yes, that episode is airing in Mushoku Tensei. But so I'll need those tears ready for that. But big unfortunate. This is my second time recording this entire Mushoku Monday because unfortunately I lost the Roz. So this is go number 2. Last minute, I have to record this again, do full edit. I'm going to be super tired, and it sucks because I thought I was caught up on everything, but it is what it is. I still want Mushoku Monday to be there, so like I've said before, that's my priority, is to have Mushoku Monday every Monday because I just enjoy it just as much as everybody else does. But yes, it's going to be difficult because now I don't remember exactly what all I talked about, and it's going to be tough to remember what I didn't talk about this time. But we'll get through it. As per usual, thank you guys for dropping by for the premiere. Hey, chat. Hope you guys are doing well. Thank you guys so much for dropping by for the premiere and making this double recording worth it. As per usual, greatly appreciate you guys' kind words. Your support keeps me going, keeps me fueled. And yes, greatly appreciate everybody at Sports Channel monetarily. Last week we had Noah with a super, Enoch with a super, Sabanasu with gifted, Gearless with a massive super as usual. Thank you so much, Gearless. It means so much. Nicholas with membership, long time as always. And yes, 40 gifted memberships. Thank you so much for that. Rose Moist with a super, Kusha with a super, and Inferno Torch with a super. Thank you guys so much for your support. It means so much to me. It's what keeps this going. But yeah, thank you guys so much for spreading the word and hitting the like button, helping this get out there. It looks like we had a lot of new people last week, which is always surprising. I think the most fun thing about new people joining Mushoku Monday is it seems like some people need to be reminded, or at least told for the first time, how this works. I like speculating on things. I like leaving things that are not completely concrete. I love digging into them. And so I had a little bit of last week, a couple of people going, my gosh, you didn't understand the whole diary thing. You need to go reread it. No. No. Yes, I'll get some things wrong. And yes, I do admit, I think specifically for this case, it was me saying that Pedagoose had killed Laplace. The reason why I was saying that is because the diary overall is a very vaguely wrote thing. And it makes sense because Rudeus was pretty much he was going about his life, and every now and then he would jot things down, and he wasn't really looking at the bigger picture all the time. He was looking at what was in front of him, and that's all he cared about. So yes, I do have a speculation in my mind that Pedagoose had killed Laplace, because the way they played out is that he didn't know much about Man-God, and then later on he said that, well, Laplace was angered when he heard Man-God. Yes, he could be referring to the last time he fought him. I don't know why he would only bring it up the second time. I think he brought it up the second time. The speculation there is that Pedagoose had killed Laplace because he may have been birthed early, because I have a theory that he's birthed early. And he's just waiting for him to come back again. So he had talked to him, killed him, and then he's waiting for him to rebirth again. So, killed him twice, waiting for another rebirth. That was my theory, and that's why I said that. Not to say that that's what it says in the diary, it's just a speculation. Again, Mushoku Monday is full of speculation. You're going to get that a lot from me, so if you're not used to that and it bugs the hell out of you, I'm sorry to say, you're either going to have to deal with it or move on, because I love doing that kind of stuff. And as per usual, I don't need people to confirm nor deny speculation. It says it in the pinned up there. It's really easy to hit and see. But yeah, with that said, I had to kick myself. During the last Mushoku Monday, I did realize something as I was listening to myself read something that I didn't catch, which is dumb, I know. But yeah, it puzzled me that I realized, and this could be a 7 Seas moment, and I'm fully aware of that. I don't need confirmation or denial, unless you know the original Japanese, and you know that it is definitely wrote wrong or translated wrong. But anyways, Randolph said, Dragon God Laplace. And it's funny that I never caught that, because that's kind of a big deal. He didn't say Demon God. He didn't say Demon Dragon King or Demon Dragon God. He said Dragon God, which is very, very weird. Again, 7 Seas could be messing up there, or it could be 2 other scenarios. One, Bodyguard told the story as he knew it. And at the time, he was known as the Dragon God Laplace before the split. Now, he could have fought him before the split. It could just know him as the Dragon God even after the split. There's many possibilities there, but I thought that was very interesting that it was kind of laid out that way. Because Orsted said that he was originally known as the Demon Dragon King, and then the split made him the Demon God and the Technique God, not the Dragon God. Again, Randolph said he stole the Fighting God's armor, wore it himself, and went to battle with the Dragon God Laplace. Very, very interesting. Again, that could be oopsie on 7 season count. So I'm just going to assume all of them are true. It could be an issue with a translation. It could be actually there. So I'm going to put a pin in that until something else comes up that confirms that. But for now, yes, I can easily chop it up as the idea of, okay, if it was the Demon Dragon, and then, Fighting God split him in half, and then the Man God told him to go fight him, he's probably still going to refer to him as that. But additionally, because he said stole the armor, it could be that Barigatti went and fought him before the split. He stole the armor, went, fought him, and failed. And then the Fighting God took back his armor and went and fought. So it's multiple things there. But yeah, it was funny because I actually went back and rechecked my notes for the whole segment that Orsted was talking about the split. And it sort of dawned on me that I'm going to add to my list of crazy theories. There's a possibility that Barigatti might be the Technique God. And the reason why I say that is because it seems to fit that Barigatti is there. Something is just kind of tickling my brain that Barigatti is there. And specifically that Orsted said that when it was split, the Demon God, stripped of his draconic essence, retained belief in the purpose to slay all humans and enormous knowledge in magic arts. Technique God was stripped of his magic powers, retained his vast trove of skills and vague but powerful compulsion to pass knowledge to others. And yes, technically when Barigatti was at the university, he constantly, on a regular basis, was sitting down with Rudeus every morning he was training, almost every morning he was training. Most mornings that he was training, Barigatti would show up and try to teach him things and train with him. And yes, technically, it also applies to the situation when he was traveling over to the west to go see Rudeus. He just jumped off the boat and went to that one tribe, and what was he doing there? He was teaching them. Now, it doesn't really apply elsewhere. That's the only problem, is we really haven't seen him training outside of that. Even the situation where he was over in the dock, it didn't mention anything about him training people there. So it could be, could not be. But that's kind of where my mindset goes, that there's a possibility that Barigatti might be the Technique God. The only problem there, again, is that he specifically says the Demon God was stripped of his draconic presence, or essence. But it doesn't say if the Technique God was stripped of his draconic essence. But it could be. Again, because technically, if he was a Demon God, you would think that you would have the appearance of a demon, possibly. Whereas Technique, I guess it doesn't really specify what he would look like. But again, because it doesn't say stripped of draconic essence, makes me think that it would possibly keep that attribute. But anyways, just a random theory that popped in my head as I was reading that, and it kind of does fit. But yeah, I'm still kind of curious as to why Barigatti didn't tell Rudeus. If we are now establishing that Barigatti in fact knew the Man God, and through proxy from Randolph, he's pretty clear, don't get involved with him. It's no matter if it's good or bad, it's not going to work out for you. Why didn't Barigatti say something? That's weird. Because honestly, Barigatti, when he first asked him, he basically said, it kind of rings a bell, but if something comes to my mind, I'll let you know. Why didn't he say anything? It seemed like he cared for Rudeus. Was he afraid of telling Rudeus because then that would tip off the Man God, like he would know the Man God was watching? Why wouldn't he say anything? It really did seem like Barigatti cared for him. And it really kind of feels bad that he didn't do anything for him. So it's a very curious thing, but I think that's everything that I covered for my preamble. Let's dive into chapter 13 and let's get this volume done with. Chapter 13, It's All Right to Be Happy. This was an interesting chapter because there's a side of me that was like, it kind of caught me from left field, but at the same time, it totally makes sense for that kind of transition from essentially only worrying about Zenoba and the failure of his mission right into kind of personalizing the whole situation the moment he sees his family. And there was a side of me that kind of felt it was a little jarring, but it technically makes sense. Rudeus returned home. Edis was close to giving birth, and may not be in the best mental state. She had times when she got depressed too, just like anyone else. Rudeus decided to have Zenoba stop by their house too, as he wanted to entrust Julie into his care again. She hadn't outstayed her welcome, but he figured that she'd be happier with him. For sure, for sure. But no, I was kind of upset that we didn't end up getting a Julie chapter. I was totally expecting an extra chapter to be literally Julie at the Grey Rat house or something like that, just to see, again, the family going, hey, come over here. Hey, do this or whatever. Or Edis saying, hey, let's train you how to beat up people. Incidentally, Ginger was out scouting for a place for them to live in. Zenoba had vacated his dorm room, and it was no longer an option for them. Even if he decided not to go back to the dorm, Rudeus wondered if he could resume his studies at the university. He was just a few months from graduation, so it seemed like a waste. Rudeus figured that he could put in a request to Genius to see if he can pull some strings. He was pretty sure that was many that went into research upon graduating as members of the Magician's Guild. Yeah, that was another thing that kind of didn't really strike me, is that, yeah, the assumption earlier was that he's done with this place, he's going back home. He had no thought of coming back. So, of course, he's going to pull out, close everything down, leave his dorm and everything like that. But at the same time, it seems like the best location for him because they give him the facilities to work with. And again, he can make it basically a career. The whole idea with the Magician's Guild, again, was the idea that you would have to give up your research to them and you can get a place in the Magician's Guild. Well, Zenoba, I look forward to working with you again.
As do I, Master.
Rudeus could at least celebrate that Zenoba was staying here. Their research on the magic armor was proceeding, and they didn't want to give up on selling figurines either. Since Zenoba lost his home here, he could always lend him some money to get back on his feet. Getting money involved usually led to unnecessary trouble, but he wouldn't hesitate if it was for Zenoba. Yeah, he's got that issue with Linnea. He's thinking back to Linnea. But yes, I do kind of agree with that, and sometimes getting, I guess, technically large amounts of money that puts you in a bad position with family members or friends sometimes doesn't work out. Arriving at home, Bite opened up the gate, as he always did for them. Between him and the green roof, the house looked like an ecologically conscious one.
I can only hope that Julie hasn't caused unnecessary trouble for your family.
I'm sure she did fine. She gets along well with Aisha, and suddenly, Rudeus heard a blade cutting through the air. He assumed that it was Norn visiting and practicing her sword, but the swings sounded much more confident than he had heard before. Even his own sword swings didn't make such a pleasant noise. Turning to the noise, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A lone woman wielding a stone sword that he had made for her for practicing. Her hair was such a vibrant red, it looked like someone dumped paint over her head. And despite the weight of the stone sword, she swung it with ease with one hand. Oh, Rudeus, welcome home. You got back kind of late. Hold up, just a second. Edis, what are you doing? Racing over to her, he panicked about her flexing her muscles like that when she was pregnant. Then he realized that her stomach was smooth and trimmed. Yeah, he missed it. Truthfully, I was bummed when I read this. Just to make sure, he tested his hand against her stomach. It was amazing. A six-pack. Muscles super tight. It definitely wasn't the kind of pregnant tummy he's seen before. What's going on? Had her six-pack compressed the baby like shrink wrap? No, he couldn't panic. Maybe the baby had been ushered lower because of the six-pack. Shoved down there with... Just shoved down her butt? Is it here instead? He checked her bottom before she socked him in the face. What do you think you're doing? Landing on his bottom, he looked up at her, crossed arms over her chest. Her chin jutted out as she gazed down. It's out now. What's out? The baby. Whose baby? Mine, of course. You messed up, Rudeus. I assumed eventually he was going to miss one, because I even made a joke in the idea that it feels like every single time he gets one of the wives pregnant, I just know something's going to come up. Like some massive thing's going to come up. Some war in another country is going to come up, and he has to leave for a long journey. And sure enough, finally, he missed it. He finally missed it. She had given birth to their baby. Rudeus pursed his lips as he digested the information. Pardon me for asking, but approximately when did this even take place? 10 days ago. It was super late at night, but I got through it. 10 days ago? So that was when he was in Sharon, and at the inn with Roxy, probably... No, he didn't want to recount that part. Shaking the bed. I didn't make it in time for birth? Yeah, it would have been nice if you got back sooner, but it's too late now. A cocky grin spread across her face as she was trying to rub it in his face. Yeah, the nice thing is at least that Edis sees it as sort of a competition, so... Unlike Sylphie or Roxy, now internally she could be screaming, who knows, but she's going to see it as like a thing of like, don't worry, Rudeus, I can handle it. See, I'm strong. I didn't really need you. The other ones, they needed you. I didn't really need you. Until we get this chapter where it talks about her pregnancy or giving birth, and it's literally her screaming, where's Rudeus? And then she's totally covering up right now. And that actually hits me again too, is the fact that not only did we not get the announcement of the pregnancy, but we also didn't even get the actual birth in for Edis in the series. Like they summarized both of these and skipped them. That's a big bummer for Edis fans. A cocky grin spread across her face, as if she was trying to rub it into his face, that she was perfectly capable of doing it herself. He wondered if he should prostrate himself. No, it wasn't as if he did anything wrong. They knew the possibility before they left. Still, he couldn't shake the guilt. While he was too perplexed to properly respond, Edis furrowed her brows. What's with you? Aren't you happy? I am happy. I just feel a bit conflicted. Oh, right. It was a boy, of course. His name is Otis, just like the historic human hero. Bummer. Bummer. Missed opportunity. I was a bit bummed out by that we didn't get at least Paul, which makes sense if she was talking about, naming him some like heroic person, unless Roxy or Sylphie set her aside and told her and informed her of when that happened and how much Paul meant to Rudeus and how much it broke him. But it's still kind of a bummer, but at the same time, it's fine. Otis was actually in the history book in volume 2. I don't remember if they've mentioned him after that, but of course this was during approximately 6,000 years ago. 1,000 years passed with a great war raging on, with fierce battles and lulls interspersed between. The hero Otis led 6 of his comrades into battle, continuing the hostilities until he defeated the 5 great demon kings and the great emperor of the demon world, Kishirika. Yeah, that's gonna go well. Well, if Bodyguardy ever does show back up, or maybe Kishirika, and they're like, don't mention his name. Don't mention. Oh, what's this boy?
Bah, what's your boy's name?
Billy. It's Paul. It's Paul. Yeah, it's Paul.
Oh, Paul, great.
Anyways, yeah, that's interesting. Now here it starts. Was joy an appropriate emotion right now? He'd failed to fulfill his mission Orsted gave him. Let Zenoba's brother die. They managed to scrape by without the whole thing coming undone, but he'd screwed up so much of what he wanted to accomplish. His son's birth was heartening news, if a bit sudden, but was he allowed to be happy about it, all things considered? Yeah, again, this is where I think it's finally personalizing, because he's been dealing with this for quite a while now, with what happened. And again, every time he thought about it, it was mainly around, he felt bad for Zenoba, he failed Zenoba, but mainly a lot of his conflict that was happening was strictly around, I failed Orsted. Orsted's going to get angry at me. But again, I do understand the idea that now that he's home, and now he's suddenly he has a joy being thrown at him. Suddenly now it gets personal. Can I be okay with this? At first right here is, this is sad news. Am I allowed to be happy? Zenoba's still standing there, obviously. Am I allowed to be happy after everything that I screwed up? All the weight of his failure is weighing down on him. Can I be happy right now? But again, I think what's the better part of this is when he goes inside and suddenly he personalizes the sibling aspect of it. Julie, Julie, Master! Suddenly the entrance flew open. A tiny figure with orange hair darted out. She streaked right past Rudeus and launched herself at Zenoba, clinging to his thigh.
Oh, Julie, my dearest apprentice, I have returned.
Zenoba slipped his hands beneath her arms and lifted her up in the air. Tears streamed down Julie's cheeks, her tiny fingers clutching his sleeve. I'm so happy to finally have happiness for Zenoba right now. Oh, it's so good. I said I was going to cry. I said I wasn't going to cry. I said I wasn't going to cry. I said there was no crying in this part. I've been waiting patiently for your return this whole time, Master.
I know.
It was a heartfelt reunion. In fact, Julie showed so much emotion at his return. Rudeus almost started to question whether his own family had been cruel to her while he was gone. She looked so happy. It's probably because she was tortured in my house. You know, I love you from the bottom of my heart, Master.
Oh, you do you? I never realized.
Please, don't ever leave me behind like that again. You never realized she was screaming and pleading to you not to leave. Again, it's that contrast of how he was before he left to go back home, and now he now understands love. He now understands siblings. He now understands caring for other people and those around you. This is where he's finally going, that's what that is. It hurts. It hurts so bad. Please, don't ever leave me behind like that again. Please, let me stay with you until your dying breath. I beg you, please. Her voice was heavy with sorrow. The way she spoke made it clear how much she had worried. Zenoba stared back, initially dumbfounded, but his lips gave way to a gentle smile.
You needn't worry anymore. From now on, I'll be with you forever.
Master. Her cry for him devolved into a fresh wave of tears. Zenoba pulled her close and pulled her head against his shoulder. He seemed quite happy for her reaction for his return. It's so great. Like I said, it's so heartwarming after the significance of what he lost, or at least, again, realizing what he lost as he lost it. Rudeus realized while Pax died, his mission was a flop. The man god sees victory, but they came back alive. Zenoba, Roxy, Ginger, and himself were healthy and whole. They didn't lose anyone. Exactly. That was something to celebrate. It was all right to be happy. How can you not be happy after seeing Julie so freaking happy right now? Edis. Rudeus wouldn't fight the sudden flood of emotions that washed over him. He threw his arms around Edis and planted a kiss on her. She was shocked at first, but returned his embrace and kissed him back. His hand slipped down to her butt. When he squeezed it, she tightened her arms around him and deepened their kiss. He went after her chest, but ended up being on the ground again. She went too far. Sorry. She squeaked in surprise as he lifted her up like a princess. He couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to see his baby's face ASAP. Very surprised by that, by the way. When I wrote that, I was like, it's one of those moments when you're reading it, you're immediately like filling in the blanks for what's ahead. And I was like thinking, okay, I'm just already preparing myself for saying he couldn't wait any longer. He whisked her off to bed and they made fun. No, he actually wants to see his baby. Rudeus, of all people, wants to put his children first. That, I'm sorry, is character growth, because how much I like to criticize Rudeus and his attentiveness to his children. And by the way, Edis technically points it out too, in a way. So, where's our boy? Where is he? In the house. She didn't fight out of his grasp. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pointed to the house in response to his question.
Master.
Yes, Zenoba?
I will respectfully take my leave for the day. I shall see you again tomorrow. Be sure to convey my gratitude to Lady Roxy as well.
You got it. Zenoba spun around and left, apparently not wanting to impose on his family gathering. Rudeus raced in the house, where he found two girls seated on the sofa. One of them was cradling a baby in her arms. Aisha spoke up. Look, Miss Norton. Look, he just smiled. Aisha, come on, let me hold him. Fine. I guess you have held Lucy and Lotta before. Oh, he's touching my breast. I guess that means he's hungry. Hard to say. We both know what his father's like. His sisters were cradling his little man. That's the second time I got to this point, and I'm like, gosh, I don't want to say the joke. It's too wrong. I can't say the joke for YouTube. I would say it anywhere else, but I can't say it for YouTube. Basically implying the idea that these two very young girls are touching his man. And then he's like, okay, that's a bad joke. As Rudeus put down Edis, his sisters glanced up at him with a smile on her face. Welcoming him home, the two of them were smiling. Both of them. He suddenly had a flashback to Pax's face. The self-deprecating, resigned grin that he wore before his end. Ugh. I don't really understand why he would think about that right now when he's faced with two younger sisters to think of Pax. It is a sibling thing, but it is kind of interesting that this face comes to him out of nowhere in this situation. He's excited. He grabs Edis, rushes into the house, goes in there, sees his two younger sisters. They look at him smiling, and he sees his child right there, and he goes, what's the trigger to go to Pax? It almost feels like it's almost forced, but again, I think this whole thing is about, he keeps thinking over here, I failed Orsted, and that involvement of failing is Pax. And then he might still be having that pop up in his mind here or there, and the moment he goes in here, he thinks of Pax, and that connection happens. Again, he personalizes it. Right here, it was business. Here, it's personal. Pax, the brother of Zenoba that I failed. I watched somebody jump to their death. That's traumatizing. And now it's finally jumping up again. Which again, the reason why I think that it's odd is because he's never really talked about on a regular basis the vision of him jumping. Just that it happened. And I think typically with this situation, when you see something horrific, like there's several things that I've seen horrific, where you just, every now and then it just pops in your head. And it's almost as if you're seeing it for the first time again, where it's so vividly clear. That's how bad it is. When you see something horrific, sometimes it's so seared into your brain. Like there's a lot of memories about, say, the memory of me eating dinner today. It's not like I can recount every single step I took while eating, but that thing that happened 14 years ago, I can vividly remember every single second of it. But again, it's odd that Rudeus never actually does that. He never actually goes that resigned look on his face before he turned, jumped off, lifted one foot over the side, or did he just leap with both of his legs straight up over it? Did he place his hand down on the railing before he kicked one of the feet over? Did he have to stumble over? Did he just plop over it? Like specifics that it would kind of play out. Now, granted, it could just be Refuge not wanting to sit there and just fully write out every single step, but that's my experience. Anyways, I got so sidetracked into the idea that this kind of pops up here. And again, I think it's because he's right now finally personalizing it, and it hurts how he does that. Norn spoke up. Miss Roxy told us what happened, about how rough it was for you guys. Forget that. Here, take him, Aisha insisted. Oh yes, right. Elder brother, this is your baby, little Otis. Norm picked up Otis and passed him off to Rudeus. He held him delicately in his arms and drank in his features. The little tuft of hair on his head was red, and his eyes were exactly like Edis. This was his son. He then cackled. I am the great demon... Sorry. Perhaps it was so surreal because he hadn't been present for his birth. Anxiety swelled up in the pit of his stomach. His little boy gazed up at him, stretching out his stubby little arms towards his chest, patting his hands against Rudeus like he was trying to grope for something soft. But sadly for him, Rudeus's pecs were rock hard. He immediately broke into tears. All tension in Rudeus faded. Relief swept in to take its place. Yeah, there was no doubt in his mind. It was his kid, Paul's grandbaby. Or he could just be hungry. Norn then spoke up. Otis, that's your daddy. He's not a stranger. Big brother, are you okay? Both of his sisters looked at him with worry. Only moments before, they were holding him, calling him cute, smiling as they did so. It was clear how much they loved him already. Rudeus knew that they both loved him as well, as family. Again, his mind drifted back to Pax. Zenoba had no children, but he figured that some of the siblings did. Pax had murdered all of them, every single one. He couldn't love them, chose not to, wasn't loved himself either. Rudeus then realized that maybe this is the kind of relationship Zenoba wanted with Pax. Rudeus' eyes began shimmering with tears. That is just so mixed right there, because on one end it's like, yeah, reminder, Pax was so nasty that he killed his entire family and their children. He killed children, or at least ordered them to be killed. That's how nasty he was. But then Rudeus is kind of flipping it into the pain that is involved there, and the idea that Pax couldn't love them, or chose not to love them, and wasn't loved himself. And here, Zenoba was wanting some kind of relationship with Pax. Possibly the relationship that he has right now with Aisha and Norn, that is sitting right in front of him, smiling at him, and holding his child. It sucks. It's so screwed up. It's such a screwed up situation. Hey, why are you crying? Edis demanded. I don't know. I can't help it. Fine. You leave me no choice then. Give me the baby. I'll hold him. So you quit crying. I don't wanna. He pulled a Norn. I don't wanna. Don't wanna. Don't wanna. Hey, no, hey Norn, your brother's finally here. He's about to leave. You should probably be nice with him, you know? Let's talk for a little. I don't wanna. But no, this is like totally that thing. Like, Edis is like, yeah, last time, just before you left, you were upset because you couldn't get Lotta off you. I'll handle this one. Don't worry, Rudeus. No, finally he's like, no, I want to hold my child for once. Rudeus shook his head like a petulant child, continuing to cradle his baby as he sat between Aisha and Norn. Tears kept trickling down his cheeks for a while. He wondered why he couldn't give Pax the recognition he so desired. Even at the end, Rudeus thought at the time that he understood how he felt. Warped though his reasons were, he should have been able to grasp Pax's justification for being unable to love others. The environment that he was in was so harsh that putting in effort seemed ridiculous. Rudeus should have realized that too. And that was kind of what I was talking about during that whole segment, and it was odd that Rudeus never really brought it up. The idea that this guy was going through some crazy stuff, and I should have seen it. I should have grasped what Pax was going through. I should have grasped it. His idea of not loving others or being able to be loved himself. What he was going through, the environment that he was going through, he was putting the effort and he couldn't get that. It's kind of a struggle there. But again, I don't blame him there because there was so much going through his mind at the time. There was so much that he was trying to keep track of. He should have seen that. In spite all the cards being stacked against him, Pax clawed his way to the throne. Rudeus could have recognized him for that hard work. That kind of recognition had the power to change people's attitudes. Maybe he wouldn't be able to forgive Pax immediately for all that he did to Lilia and Aisha, but he should be able to do something to dissuade him from taking his own life. See, there's a side of me that's like, yeah, you can acknowledge what Pax did, but at the same time, you have to remember that what happened there was that Pax was given, well, would Rudeus know everything there? Essentially, Pax arrived there with a nuke, and he walked in that door with that nuke. And the nuke gave him that position. And Rudeus knows now that it was due to the king handing that to him. I hate to say it, but in Pax's eyes, he could have seen that he achieved something. He even pointed out that he was doing things for the kingdom, but it wasn't as if he gained something. It wasn't as if he built that. The king handed it to him. Pax went in there and started putting into play what he chose. Now we'll see with the extra chapter, yes, technically he gained that weapon in a sense. It was really his doing that probably secured him that weapon particularly, but he was going to be given a weapon to walk into that field, and that field was decimated by that weapon. Can you really say that he achieved much? Rudeus here is saying that he worked hard, and that's the important thing here. Rudeus felt that Pax clawed his way there. Pax was kicked out of the kingdom, and Pax earned the right to carry that weapon into Chiron and secure the throne through his efforts. And yeah, he should have been able to see that. And additionally, how could he have told him that he did something, and what could he have done to dissuade him from jumping off there? Now again, he's almost blaming himself. I should have said something. Maybe I should have been able to do something, and I didn't. And that's another sucky thing, is like, even if you're not directly involved with somebody doing something, could you have done something to stop it? When you're not the person that, like, say if you're driving down the road and somebody's on the side of the bridge, you don't even know who the person is, but you still felt like, maybe if I got out of the car faster, maybe I did something quicker, maybe if I said the right words when I was trying to talk him off the cliff, basically. Someone must have heard Rudeus' sobs because footsteps came echoing down the stairs. After a moment, Sylphie and Lucy popped their heads in. Roxy followed close behind, carrying Lotta in her arms. Lilia and Zenith followed soon after. Sylphie had probably heard what happened from Roxy. She'd seen Rudeus weeping and silently began stroking his head. Lucy decided to mimic her mother, climbing up on his lap before reaching up to his head. Honestly, you're such a crybaby. Edis then joined in. Every single one of them were being so kind. It's like everybody's like, there's like 1,000,000 hands on his head. There's like 15 hands on there. Like, how much space does he have on his head? Aisha, Norn, no matter what happens, I'll always support you. If you're ever in trouble, don't think twice about turning to me for help. You might think that I'm not very dependable, but I swear to you, I'll do everything in my power to help. Rudeus, he's projecting onto his own siblings. It's like, ugh, it hurts. It hurts. Again, seeing something like that, I don't ever want to see that happen with my family. I don't ever want my siblings to think that they can't turn to me for help. Because Pax didn't do that with Zenobia, who was standing right there saying, look at me, brother. I'm here for you. Let's get out of here. I've come to take you out of here. Zenobia rushed from that fort to that palace on the hopes of getting his brother out of danger. And he couldn't see it because all he could see was that nobody liked what he was doing. Zenobia wasn't able to overcome everything else that was bearing down on him. They traded glances, faces seeming to think that, if anything, they were more troubled right now because he was bawling. He had to pull himself together. If he kept this up, they really wouldn't turn to him for help. Okay, got it, Aisha said. Yes, we'll be sure to heed what you said, Norn agreed. They nodded in unison. Good. It looks like there was no problems with their family then. He sniffled as he glanced at Roxy and Lotta. Nestled in her mother's arms, Lotta looked as impudent as ever. It was fortunate that his life hadn't been in serious danger this time, although it may have been a different story if Roxy hadn't been there. Roxy was so dependable. No matter how hard he tried, he was always weak. Roxy protect. Twice, Roxy protect. Without her at his side, he could have easily faltered partway through the journey. He had Lotta to thank for throwing a fit and coaxing Roxy to tag along. No amount of gratitude towards the two of them would ever be enough. Roxy, you are amazing on this trip. You are too, Rudy. Their journey was over. It had been a rough ride. He found himself doubting things that he shouldn't have, and it had taken a serious toll on him mentally. All he had to show for his efforts was failure and lingering trauma. He let Pax die. The whole thing felt like a nightmare, but it was over now. Tomorrow would surely bring new things. Before it did, there were some things that he needed to talk about. Everyone, I want you to listen closely to what I'm about to say. That day, Rudeus told his family everything about the man god, about him, Orsted, about the war raging on between the two of them, and everything that had happened to him in the past. He mentioned that Lara might be the savior in the future, and explained why he was cooperating with Orsted. He shared every detail, and once he said his piece, he asked them for their support. When the time finally came, he wanted them to stand up for him, and by extension, Orsted. Every single one of them nodded. Every single one of them. Edis, Sylphie, Roxy, Lilia. Of course, Nora and Aisha were dumbstruck by this sudden flood of information. Lucy in particular didn't seem to really understand what was being said, but they all wore earnest expressions and bobbed their heads. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He finally comes clean. Until later on we find out, yeah, I said everything, but I disincluded this part. Yeah, that's, finally, and again, this is kind of one of those things that over time, and now granted, let's be perfectly clear, there's a reason why he hasn't been able to tell them. Because the moment that he really did feel like he could present this whole situation to them was the moment in which the man god was revealed as being his enemy. And he couldn't just come out and say something because, one, he was fearing that, but additionally because at that time, he was having to go kill Orsted. And then at that time, he then was employed by Orsted, and everybody feared Orsted, so anything he said was going to blow up in his face. So he couldn't tell them because there was the curse. So it's been a sprinkle. It has literally been a sprinkle of information, but now it's finally here. And support me. Growth. Can we point out how massive that is? Rudeus finally saying, please support me. Please help me. He's finally saying, please help. And additionally saying, of course, the big obvious thing is that he's, again, presumably not going to be around for the time that when things start really building up with Orsted and Laplace, and he wants them to help Orsted. He's asking them to help. And again, I think that's a big thing because that is literally asking them to put themselves in danger. But let's be truthful. They're already in danger. So it's better they know and can choose to support him rather than keep them in the dark and they're always in danger and they just don't know it. It's big. It's very big. It's very, very big. It's time to review the steps required defeating the man god. It is time to review everything. Reviewing time, class. Are you guys ready? I feel like a teacher. All right, time for review. In order to reach him, they needed 5 hidden treasures passed down by the dragonfolk. Treasures that were originally created by distant ancestry. Each of the 5 dragon generals possessed 1. And by using the dragon god's secret art, the door to the world would be open. I'm guessing he's talking about Barren World. Rudeus' future self had despaired upon realizing that he wouldn't be able to get the last treasure. And Laplace probably was the one that held the final piece. Judging by what Orsted said about needing to kill him, it could be surmised that they would need to defeat each general to obtain their treasure. The maniacal dragon king Chaos was already dead, likely done in by Orsted, which meant that they already had the item he held. Yep, that kind of goes to my theory that he has to kill them. I was thinking this for the longest time. I'm not sure if I've ever talked about it in the Mushoku Mondays. But yeah, that does technically make sense as to why, I mean, Armanfi mostly. But Pedagogus doesn't seem to be too comfortable about Orsted. Because Orsted has probably told Pedagogus, I am going to have to eventually kill you so that I can get to the man god. And Pedagogus is like, what? Oh, but no, I want to kill Laplace. Don't worry, I need to kill Laplace too, so I'm going to leave you alive. And that does technically get into my theories coming up here in a minute. That I think that they have an agreement. I literally do think there's an agreement. And I do believe that there's a part of me that thinks that Orsted, again, going what Rudeus will theorize here in a minute, that Orsted had things put into play in case that didn't happen. And one of the things that he could put into play is that he might expect to have Pedagogus help him with Laplace. That's probably why he hasn't messed with Pedagogus. Additionally, also the idea that it's going to take probably quite a bit of mana in order to take down Pedagogus. Again, I'm very curious about that. Or it could possibly be that Pedagogus told Orsted, don't worry, as long as I get to kill Laplace, I'll help you kill him. Once Laplace is dead, I'll give you my key. Could be. But again, I did have a thought process here that they'd have to kill them. Yeah, it could be that when they reincarnate, they have some sort of secret technique and they can create the treasure. It just pops out of nowhere. They say, treasure poopa. And if they're that general, it appears. Like, only they can cast it. But, creating it out of thin air didn't make sense to me. Like, just because they exist, suddenly the treasure shows up. My thought process is, my theory is that it's probably like either a gem that reincarnates with them inside their body or their heart, something like that. And so, yes, they're having to kill them and retrieve that from their body is what's going to have to happen. Therefore, only 4 dragon generals remained. Holy Dragon Emperor Sharad, Abyssal Dragon King Maxwell, the Armored Dragon King Petagus, and a Demonic Dragon King Laplace. It was possible that Sharad and Maxwell were also already dead. Orsted wouldn't share that information with Rudeus. Maybe because he was concerned for Rudeus, not wanting him to know his actions when it could be construed as him killing his own kind. Or perhaps he actually felt guilty about what he had done, especially since he didn't seem to be on particularly bad terms with Petagus. I don't see Orsted keeping that from him because he feels bad. No way. Nah. I think Orsted's just not telling him because Orsted is being very choosy. Even at this point, he's being very picky about what he says. I mean, I was kind of actually shocked that he wasn't clear with Rudeus about Laplace's birth in Chiron. That doesn't make any sense. It keeps giving this indication that, okay, Rudeus, I wasn't telling you anything because I didn't fully trust you. Like the whole thing that happened with Asra, that was a massive test. And then he divulged more information to Rudeus. Okay, now I can trust you. I'm reincarnated. Okay, that's big news. Why didn't you tell me that before? Because I didn't trust you before. He keeps supplying information that he's never done before. It could be very well that he doesn't want to tell Rudeus so Rudeus doesn't know where the keys are or that he has the keys because he's afraid he still doesn't fully trust Rudeus. In any case, Laplace's rebirth was absolutely essential part of his plan. He'd return, reborn as a child, and Orsted's objective was to pin down exactly where, as it would be easier to strangle him in the cradle. However, now they no longer knew the location he returned to, only that he would again launch himself into a war against the humans. Orsted needed to navigate that conflict and take his life. It seemed as though getting that last treasure would prove to be quite a trial, even for Orsted, enough that it would leave him weakened against the man-god afterwards. Orsted had thus declared this loop a bust. Yet, it didn't seem as if he'd given up completely. He was discouraged, but Rudeus almost felt as if he predicted this outcome. Taking Ariel's situation, for example, I completely forgot about this when I was thinking about this whole situation. Makes perfect sense. Orsted said that Astra Kingdom would face a great crisis 100 years from now, but that would be averted if Ariel became king. He also mentioned something about someone useful being born in the Astra Kingdom afterward. Rudeus wasn't clear on the details, but he suspected Orsted wanted the stability in Astra Kingdom for the war against Laplace. That makes sense. It was a big fight. And yeah, I think at the time it was like that massive question mark is like, who was going to be a threat to them? The main thing was that she was going to push them to learn magic. And they needed magic specifically. But why magic specifically? It makes sense now that we've kind of, at least in this story, in this volume, we have given a clear perspective of how advantageous mages are to a large scale battle. That no matter the numbers, having some very talented mages at your disposal can change the tide of war. And so yeah, her bringing a bunch of really talented mages in and pushing magic makes sense. But the question mark obviously is, who would be attacking them? About the only thing that came to my mind was maybe the King Dragon Realm or possibly Millis. But it makes sense if it's somebody from Chiron or around that area that will start getting a bunch of demons in tow and come down there. Now again, he's probably going to be born there. It would be born there, been left and gone over to the Demon Continent, or they might actually be born in the Demon Continent, and they'll come over this way. Also makes me kind of question if this is another case where he's not specifying who is born in the Astra Kingdom. Is it a possibility that this person that could be born in Astra Kingdom could be Laplace? It could be a possibility that he has several locations that he thinks Laplace might pop up, which I'll get more on that in a minute. Astra Kingdom was chief amongst the world powers. If they could put up good resistance and wear Laplace down, Orsted would have an easier time finishing him off. It was also possible that Orsted may have suspected that his rebirth would be different in this loop from the moment that he learned about Rudeus. Finally, they're acknowledging that there was plenty of reasons to believe that his existence threw a wrench into the flow that led Laplace's rebirth in Ch13. Yeah, I've been saying this over and over again, so I'm sorry for everybody that's here weekly. Tired of hearing me say this. Rudeus existing throws a massive wrench in everything. And the main key thing there is that he's producing children. He's got Sylphie, he's got Edis, he's got Roxy, and they're producing new children. The butterfly effect that comes from Rudeus is insane. But I haven't talked about this in a long time, but still, to this day, let's remember the one biggest wrench being thrown into this timeline that I would assume Orsted is thinking about. Maybe Orsted is playing it off that, yeah, this is a big mistake, or he's building up for a long time and it kind of messes things up. But Orsted should know that this timeline is not very much so going to be playing out like previous timelines. Why? Yes, Rudeus. And Rudeus has a very strong destiny, so it's very big. Roxy has a big destiny. Sylphie has a big destiny. Their children would have big destinies. They all have big destinies. So they're a big wrench. And they're playing out significantly different than those previous timelines. But what other massive thing has happened in this timeline that has not happened in the previous timelines? Displacement incident. That was like, you talk about the butterfly effect where Rudeus walks down the street and steps on a twig and that might cause somebody to die 500 years from now. Let's talk about taking an entire region and shooting them everywhere and destroying all the inhabitants, like the structures and crops and everything of that one location. You're talking about probably a lot of people losing a lot of food. You might have starvations in the surrounding kingdoms, prices for things shooting up. And then again, you have a whole bunch of people being shot everywhere, many of them dying, some of them never appearing, some of them possibly going elsewhere. And I have my theories on that. And then, yes, they might come back. Their destinies might be strong enough that they make it back. And the destinies might still push them to what they need to do. Destiny can possibly still suppress that butterfly, that massive butterfly effect. So let's talk about a tsunami effect that comes from the displacement incident. This has got to be in Orsted's mind as, yeah, there's probably a really big chance that Laplace was not going to appear in the Ch13 Kingdom or Republic because displacement incident, because Rudeus, so many things. He had to have known. It could very well be a case where Orsted, yes, possibly in the previous timeline. This is my thought process. Is you have, Orsted going through all these time loops, and I want to say that in the previous one, just before this one, he probably finally figured out where Laplace was born. Aha! So he came from the Ch13 Kingdom. Like, he finally pinpointed it in the previous loop. I found you. I figured out exactly where you're born. Next loop, I got this. And like, maybe he fought Laplace and found out from somebody, yeah, he was born in Ch13 Kingdom. He's like, got it. I got it. I know exactly. Who was his father? Oh, that guy. Okay, I know exactly where he's going to pop up. Starts this loop. He's got it. He's like, all right. But he still plays everything out the same. I got to make sure everything plays out exactly the same as this last loop, the previous loop. Crap, a displacement incident. That's not good. All right, keep things going. And there's a possibility that things that he normally put into play, he's still put into play. Like, in the 2 loops ago, he set up the Orsted Kingdom to fight Laplace. And in the last one, that's when he discovered where he was at. But he's still going to put that into play in case he's wrong. Even in this one, I'm still going to put this into play in case I'm wrong. So it's not that big of a deal. He's still going to put the same things into play. It's just the problem is that when he finally figured out last time, he was too drained to fight the man god. And he's too afraid of that happening again. There's a good chance that the previous timeline, he discovered where he was born, but still beat Laplace, and then went to the man god and lost because he was drained. I'm going to get him this time. But still, everything's in play. It's really cool. It's a really cool thought experiment. It was also odd that man god had messed around with Laplace's return to begin with, but doubts were quickly dispelled. The more Rudeus thought about it, the more he realized that while man god's precognition could account for Orsted's movements, he already saw the dragon gods as enemies. If anyone had been waving the anti-man god flag for centuries, it had to be Laplace. He probably suspected Orsted would revive Laplace to try something with him. Somewhere in Orsted's loop, which spans several hundred years, there must have been a moment where the man god realized what he was up to. which led him proactively obstructing Orsted's efforts. That would make sense. Anything the Dragon God tried to accomplish would be the Man God's detriment after all. That's interesting to kind of point out there. And the idea that, yes, he's acknowledging that the Man God does not like Laplace. Now the question mark is why does he not like Laplace? Did he kill Laplace the last time because he was afraid of Laplace's key? Like, does he already know that they can create keys to get to him, and so he's trying to preemptively get rid of Laplace? That's a curious question mark there. But it does kind of play in that whole thing that I was talking about before, where it's like, it's very interesting, and it's still very interesting how that Orsted was placed in this specific timeline here. It's obviously seeming like the Dragon God, when he sent Orsted forward, he was specifically aiming for, it does make you question, does he know when Laplace would die in the future and sent Orsted exactly there when Laplace would come back? It's very interesting, that specific timeline there. But yes, it does question, okay, is it because Laplace is technically Dragonfolk, or does he, again, not want him to produce a key? In any case, this iteration of the world was heading down a different path than the one Orsted knew from his many, many loops. Rudeus' days of obediently doing Orsted's biddings and trying to set dominoes in motion for him was over. If his plans were already completely derailed, there was no point in continuing to pursue them. Laplace was going to reincarnate. There was going to be a war. If they didn't take Laplace down, they wouldn't be able to reach the Man God, and it would be pointless if Orsted needed to spend a bulk of his power to do so. There was no way he could defeat the Man God in a depleted state. This is where Zenoba's proposal to gather allies for the war came in. Working separate from Orsted, they gathered powerful companions over 80 to 100 years in time. That was enough time to set up an anti-Man God faction and bring in allies to support Orsted, or lay the groundwork for such a group to exist. Orsted would have his own troops by the time they were done. In all likelihood, Rudeus wouldn't live long enough to see the war or take part in it, but he could leave behind companions and an organization they built together, trusting that they would carry out his will. This would ensure Orsted would go on to defeat the Man God for him as well. This would be Rudeus' goal for the rest of his days. This is interesting because the way that this is all worded here, it almost sounds like Rudeus is saying, I'm no longer working for Orsted. He's no longer going to have me do things. The way this is worded right here almost implies Orsted no longer needs me. He's no longer going to have me set up these things to put something into play against the Man God for some future. Now, this could be just Rudeus. Rudeus thinks that Orsted's never going to call him again, and so he's going to just focus on making this army. And that technically does answer a slight wish that I had. Like, in the last couple of volumes, there's been a side of me that's like, this is going to kind of get repetitive if Refugien relies too much on this concept of he goes to Orsted. Orsted said, Man God doing this, go stop this. Rudeus goes out there, tries to figure out what the Man God's doing, comes back home, mission fail or success. Okay, Orsted says, go fight this thing now for the Man God. He goes out there, tries to find the disciples. I could see that getting repetitive. I don't know if that's what we're doing right now, but it almost feels the way that he's putting that is Rudeus' days of obediently doing Orsted's biddings and trying to set dominoes in motion for him were over. It kind of implies that he's no longer working for Orsted. He's working for Orsted, again, building all the companions for the future, but again, it kind of plays out like he's not going to be doing these little quests for Orsted anymore. Very curious. But yeah, that's an interesting setup for what's to come. I'm going to guess he's going to start building up the Rudeus Corporation and at the same time probably mess with some other stuff. We'll have to see in the following volume. Extra chapter, The Death God and the Gluttonous Prince. This is a little extra nugget. I always love these extra chapters because they're always like a little bit more insight into the mindset of the characters. And yeah, a lot of this stuff kind of fell in play to what I kind of expected happened over in the Dragon King realm. But the ending was definitely a massive gut punch. I don't like Pax. Still not gonna like them. Many royals resided in the King Dragon Realm's royal villa. They were not, however, specifically King Dragon royalty. These were the prince and princesses of vassal states. Officially, they were studying here, or had been brought here as foster children. But in truth, they were essentially hostages, held to ensure the vassal states didn't rebel. The princes and princesses weren't very conscious of their position as hostages. As long as their home country stayed compliant, their safety and stay was guaranteed, allowing them to live in leisure. Not all of them were so carefree, however. An ambitious few spent their time improving themselves and keeping a sharp eye out to climb the social ladder. Pax was one such person. He had a sudden change of heart one day when he threw himself into studying sword fighting, magic, and academics. Pax swore that he would keep up this daily regimen. But such a drastic change couldn't stay consistent for long. Lately, he'd start dedicating his hours in the morning to a different pursuit. Namely, he'd visit the gardens close to the royal villa. That's when I told him, "Unhand that slave. I'll be one purchasing him." Pax produced his sword as he regaled to a nearby girl with a tale. A scuffle ensued after that. Thugs came charging at me and cut each man down, one by one. Their boss was the last one to approach me. He had a battle axe. At least twice my size, he let out a roar so intimidating that even the most hardened warrior would be shaken in their boots. And he lunged at me. I skillfully evaded his attacks and unleashed my most powerful magic on him, hitting him right in the face. The man stumbled a few steps, and without missing a beat, I was immediately on him with my blade. Slash, and down he went. Pax made an exaggerated gesture with his blade, even employing magic to illustrate his fight. Once his story drew to a close, he paused to glance at the girl. Her eyes were vacant, giving him no indication of what she was thinking. But for some reason, Pax was able to read her expression. He hadn't been able to at first, but over time he began to notice the tiniest of changes. Right now, her eyes shone more brightly than usual, and her cheeks had color. She looked like she was genuinely enjoying his story. Sweat dripped down his brow. He remained quiet, frozen in the pose he had struck, signifying that he laid his enemy low. But after a few moments, he straightened up. Well, such a turnout would have been ideal, but nothing ever goes perfectly as you pictured in your head. All I did was provide backup to my bodyguards with my wind magic. The girl looked no less impressed than before. But still, my lord, you became the leader of the slums. Indeed, regardless of how it happened. That much is certainly true. Having defeated their leader, I now rule over the slums. Amazing. Pax grinned. Isn't it? I may have had the slightest case of cold feet during all the commotion, but that doesn't change the fact that I consolidated Sharon's ruffians. Go on, I permit you to shower me with more praise. Amazing. Truly amazing. Her expressions were muted, giving little indication of her emotion, and her tone was flat, with little inflection. I was so glad that they pointed that out, because I was reading that part, I'm like, oh crap, and I gotta make a voice for her, and I'm assuming that she's gonna be pretty much, like, blank. And sure enough, they finally said it. Okay, so it's gonna be completely, like, flat. Yet the way that she eagerly listened to him made it clear how excited she was about his story. Pax had dramatized his story more than a little. In a desperate bid to retain some dignity, he slipped in the part about supporting his bodyguard. In truth, he hadn't done much. It pained him to fib like this, but not a single soul in the realm listened to his stories earnestly. It was only natural that he got carried away. And there's a side of me that kind of thinks because she enjoys the story so much, who cares? Tell him. Now, there's going to be a side of it that's like, okay, don't dramatize it too much because it might blow up in your face later when there's an expectation that you're going to do something, which technically it does. Later on, it technically does blow up in his face, but still. Tell me more. The truth didn't matter to Benedict. Since her family had largely given up on her education, she couldn't read, and no one else spoke to her like Pax did. She was locked away in the cramped confines of the royal villa. Anywhere she went, they treated her like an eyesore. She woke up in the morning, ate, and wandered off to find some deserted place to waste away time. Bedtime would come, and she'd start the whole dull routine again the next day. Amid all this monotony, Pax's exciting tales were a breath of fresh air. She enjoyed it. Finally, Pax did something good in his life. The one good thing Pax has ever done in his entire life, right here, making Benedict's life something good. Which makes it all the more painful that he wouldn't just leave the stupid palace with her. Ugh, there's a side of me that's like, ugh, I get the pain. I get that there's that aspect of being driven to the edge, and it's hard to really say somebody is thinking right or whatever, but it's like still painful that he'd be willing to leave her. That hurts. More, she repeated. Tell me. Very well then. Next, I suppose, I can regale you of the tales when I visited a spring of fairies. Or at least, I'd like to. But we'll have to save it for tomorrow. This afternoon, I have studies and magic practice to attend to. Okay. Such an admirable listener. But you needn't frown so. All you need to do is wait. Tomorrow will come whether you will it or not. Anyone observing Pax these days would agree that he was a diligent worker. Once he finished training, he would study and do magic practice. Admittedly, he did slack off quite frequently in the morning, but he'd practice his sword swings dutifully, even if he shared stories with Benedict. So he was gradually honing his skills. As for his normal education, he no longer had the luxury of a private tutor since he was abandoned by Sharon. He was left to continue his studies on his own Based on what he had remembered learning, his persistent efforts had slowly improved his reputation at the villa. But before any of that, we must eat. It's time to return to the villa. I'll see you off. Ha ha ha. There's no need for that. No need at all. Pax would part ways with her and head to his room. The gardens were at the edge of the estate, meaning Benedict's room was close, but Pax's was quite far away. Benedict was always reluctant to part with him, so she would walk with him part way. Despite the way people treated her, she was still a princess of a large nation, and one who actively tried to spend more time with him. That was enough to put Pax in high spirits, which inevitably led him to rambling. During my magic studies yesterday, I came upon a realization. It was nothing more than I thought, but when I looked into it, I found my assumptions were correct, which means that, from time immemorial, magic has been... There ain't no way that he thought of something like super cool that was like hidden secrets of magic history or something like that. Ain't no way, right? Randomly out of nowhere, Pax is tapping into like the history of magic and its origins or something like that. And now we'll never know because he died. From the outside, Benedict looked like she was disinterested and spacing out. Her eyes, by comparison, were filled with curiosity and interest as she listened to him. The maids who served the royal villa and the occasional aristocratic guest would give them cold, disapproving looks. Would you look at that? The worthless worm of the Ch13 kingdom is clinging on to that deadbeat princess. One of the nobles scoffed in passing. As Pax froze, he felt the urge to turn and get a good look at the naysayer, but he stopped himself. Each time he heard remarks like that, it made him queasy. It made the bile crawl up his throat. He wanted to whip around, curse them, and behead them for their insolence. But those hideous desires remained wishful thoughts. He knew better than anyone that he had no power here. Yeah, having to get used to the fact that he can't just scream off of their heads and they're gone. Just you wait, you cur. You'll see. As he muttered under his breath, Benedict's expression clouded. She hadn't received much education at all, but that didn't mean that she couldn't think for herself. She understood her circumstances, and she knew that Pax was being denigrated for sticking close to her. Your Highness, I'll... Enough. Don't say it. You'll only irritate me. Pax didn't see things the same way that she did. He was used to being disparaged. He faced the same kind of talk in Ch13. Look at me. Look at my body. At these arms and legs. This is how I look since I was born. No matter what I do, people will always belittle me. I guarantee you this. They are not saying it because of you. Pax is being a good boy. Now, it's technically him just kind of saying it's all about me. It's all about me. It's always been about me. It's never about you. It's all about me. But he knows, I think he knows very well that they're talking about her too. So it kind of makes me believe that, yes, he's kind of taken upon himself to make her feel better. But she's going to be used to it too. She's going to be used to it too. Not used to it, but know that it's happening. I guess the best way to put it. You never get used to things like that. He lost count how many times they had this conversation. Despite his reassurances, Benedict grew despondent. She had never left the palace, so she didn't quite understand. She didn't see what was so different about his short, stubby body. She couldn't imagine how much ridicule he had suffered. In a way, they were both in the same boat. That's precisely what drew her to Pax. And not the man god? And not the man god? Is that the confirmation there? This is a third-person perspective looking at into the minds and bodies and lives of these two people. No mention of man god. I guess that means my theory's gone, but, I mean, man god could have popped up later on and said, hey, this will help save Pax. Who knows? Despite his constant complaints about the odds being against him, he still pushed himself to fight them. As they crossed the boundary between the palace and the neighboring villa, Pax paused. What's that smell? A pungent odor hung in the air. It was deeply unpleasant, like someone cremating a corpse. Yet there was also something almost fragrant about it, like someone was cooking. The more Pax breathed it in, the more his appetite was stirred. Still, he wondered if something that stank this much could be edible. His curiosity couldn't ignore the bizarre balance of this scent. Seems to be coming from the parade grounds. I'm intrigued. Shall we check it out? But, would anyone really reprimand you for wandering a little from the royal villa? If they wish to monitor your behavior to that extent, they ought to at least appoint one person to observe you. Now, let's go. Okay, Benedict answered, sounding a little happy despite herself. She's like, oh yeah, we're gonna be bad. It's like a time he's like, oh, we get to be bad, let's go be bad. There was a painting in Ch13 Kingdom entitled Hell's Banquet. It depicted 5 morbidly obese nobles throwing a dinner party, which wasn't so strange. But if one looked closely, they'd notice the nobles had a skeleton serving them. Three of the aristocrats seemed to be none the wiser, locked in cheerful conversation. One of them had noticed and wore a shocked look as he frantically turned to the person seated beside him. The last member of the group was collapsed on the table. It was unclear whether they were asleep or dead. Pax didn't know much about this particular painting, but he did remember his older brother, Zenova Chiron, standing in front of it and mumbling to himself as he studied the scene. Had the men there wanted to be part of this banquet? If they hadn't, then why were they forced to sit there? And who was it that had prepared the food that they were being served anyways? Zenova had been asking such questions aloud. Perhaps it was because of that encounter that Pax remembered that painting so well. Perhaps the painting was depicting a scene like the very one he was seeing now. A makeshift outdoor kitchen had been set up at the edge of the parade grounds to teach new recruits how to cook. 5 squires were at a nearby table, each deathly pale, eyes wandering constantly to the kitchen. The smell Pax caught earlier grew worse to the point that he felt like pinching his nose. Most intriguing of all, however, was the man working at the kitchen. He was a skeleton, or at least his face resembled one. He wore a chilling smile as he stirred an enormous pot. Just a little longer, and it'll be ready. The soldiers' faces contorted with despair, assuming their lives were forfeit. Perhaps the men of the painting had been in a similar type situation. They were right about being unable to run, though. After all, the man producing the meal was someone Pax knew well. Death God Randolph. Randolph Mariane was indeed known as the Death God. Fifth amongst the 7 great powers, he served directly under the High General Chagall as member of the Blackworm Knights. He had no subordinates and always worked solo. He was the strongest knight in the realm and had pretty much secured the highest position. Despite his towering station, he'd personally gathered the squires to serve them a meal. It was no wonder that they couldn't run. How can you say no? You men there, what's going on? And you are? 7th Prince of Sharang Kingdom, Pax. Despite being a foreigner, he was still royalty. They started to rise from their chairs to get on one knee. No need. You are permitted to stay in your seats and speak as you are. Well, you see, we made a rather, fatal mistake during our drills. 3 days ago, the King Dragon Realm conducted a large-scale drill. These men were squires for High General Chagall Gargantus himself. While the drills proceeded smoothly, these boys screwed up spectacularly. They hadn't properly secured the saddle on Chagall's horse. Seconds after he commanded a charge, he took a humiliating fall to the dirt. Fortunately, healers tended to him, which meant the drill went on. That was the only reason they only got a scolding instead of more severe punishment. Chagall, meanwhile, was not spared embarrassment, as the royal family overseen the drill and witnessed it. It kind of makes me wonder after all this stuff is like, yeah, I wonder if that wasn't it. Like, this couldn't have been it. Their blunder brought shame to the very man they revered. In other circumstances, they would have been fired. But they got off relatively scot-free. In their guilt, they pleaded for punishment, but he only smiled magnanimously and refused. Chagall's also a magnanimous man. At first, this brought them discomfort, but it wasn't until the next day they learned why. Lord Randolph suddenly came to visit us today, saying he would cook for us. And what's the problem with that? You mean you don't know? Rumors were rampant amongst the knights. It was a curious thing. Why would one of the 7 great powers become a subordinate to the High General? Randolph should be granted his own region to rule over. So why was it that he always worked alone? That was because High General Chagall had trained him to be an assassin from early on. Chagall was a mixed race, with elven and human blood. Interesting. I think they kind of mentioned that idea when he first showed up in that one chapter, the Nanahoshi meet chapter. Yes, I think they were mentioning that he was kind of dressed oddly, like a bandit or whatever, but he's somebody that was very good looking or something like that. And his extended lifespan had seen him serve at the apex of the King Dragon Realm's military for many years. He had a habit of a crude side, but he was loyal to a fault and widely known for his honesty and integrity. No one spoke ill of him. But how could that even be possible? Remaining spotless while in charge of an enormous organization like the King Dragon Realm's military? Well, he wasn't spotless. He had any man who earned his ire killed behind the scenes, using the very assassin he reared himself, Randolph. As proof of this, only a few short years after Randolph became widely known to the public, every single one of Chagall's political rivals were wiped out. Several amongst them died from illness of unknown origin or tragically passed after being caught in an accident. I wonder how much this is true. I wonder if a lot of this stuff is just really people revering him. Maybe he is really a good guy. But it does technically make sense. I mean, if he built Randolph is definitely assassin material. And so it does technically make sense if he built him up that way that he would use him. But it does kind of make me wonder if how much of this is actually true. It is sort of putting it in a realm of don't mess with this guy. And it could be rumors that were created in order for people not to mess with him. Curious. We're gonna be killed because we humiliated His Excellency. No, I don't want to die. Your Highness, please save us. I have a girl I love back home. I haven't gotten a chance to tell her how I feel yet. I can't die like this. I at least wanted to meet my end on a battlefield. Now I'm going to be killed because of a little screw up during a practice drill. You gotta be kidding me. And to think, my mom was so happy to see me become a squire. As he lamented their fates, a creepy, chilling voice called out over to them. You lot sure are being awfully rude. I heard you were down in the dumps after being scolded. So I decided to make you some of my delicious cuisine. That's all. These have to be the knights that were with Pax. These have to be the knights that were with Pax. I'm convinced. Because I think they mentioned the idea that when Rudeus first came in that throne room, he had Randolph there, which we find out eventually, yes, Randolph, and again, we're getting proof right here, Randolph liked Pax. And yeah, he probably requested to go with Pax to Sharon. But who were the knights? They kind of point out the knights themselves were also very quick to respond to Rudeus and the words they were saying. Randolph was sleepy. He just wanted to go. He just didn't want to be there. But the knights were being very attentive of what they were hearing and seeing. And yes, you could chop it up as they're tough, hardened knights that were sent from the King Dragon realms. And if they were ordered to protect Pax, they're going to protect Pax. If Pax dies, they're dead. That kind of mentality. But I kind of want to believe that these guys right here were the ones with Pax. No, there was only 2 knights there. So maybe not. Maybe not. That would have been cool, though. I mean, one of them could have died, but he did say they're, like, elite knights, which he could have been talking them up. Like, they were just technically 2 squires that maybe they achieved knight status to go with Pax. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities there. Pax tensed up and turned. The knight with a skeletal face wore a chilling smile as he hauled over the pot. The smell was so putrid, it almost seemed otherworldly. Now, dig in, everyone. Delicious food is the best cure when you're feeling depressed. Randolph's grin almost seemed to declare his intent to rob them of their lives. Pax gulped and retreated a step, too intimidated not to. His heel bumped against something, and someone tugged at his sleeve. Glancing over his shoulder, he glimpsed an expressionless Benedict. Even though her face conveyed no emotions, he could see her saying to save them. Why did he have to save these fools? Were Pax not a changed man, he would have asked that. But this plea came from the girl who heard his tales. She was someone he wanted to impress. Got roped into it. Normally I wouldn't touch this, but no, I have to now. Randolph. Yes? What is it? Who are you, by the way? My name is Pax Sharon, 7th Prince of the Sharon Kingdom. Since I was fortuitous enough to find my way here, I would like to partake in this repast of yours as well. Oh? He didn't really intend to put that stuff in his mouth. He was a prince after all. If this food was poisoned, he was sure Randolph would back down. Yes, of course, Your Highness. Instead, Randolph beamed in delight at the offer. As you clearly see, I am quite the gourmet. You'll regret if you serve me some lackluster meal. I might not look it, but I used to run a restaurant myself, you see. I am quite confident in the flavor. You do understand what I'm saying, don't you? Yes, I most certainly do understand. Pax thought the man was out of his mind. If his poison killed him, the matter wouldn't be solely between the King Dragon realm and Sharon. There were royals here from a wide variety of countries. A knight couldn't get away from senselessly murdering one of them. The other vassal states wouldn't stand for it, and there would be a rebellion. I honestly feel like they could cover it up. Still, Randolph looked perfectly composed. In fact, he seemed to be challenging Pax. If you think you can eat it, then eat it. We both know you're only saying you will. You won't actually do it. It's not the enthralling blade, it's the enthralling spoon. Randolph has activated the enthralling spoon. He thinks no one will care about his death. Damn it, he didn't care if he was one of the 7 great powers. He was looking down his nose at him. He couldn't afford to die here. Yet he couldn't allow himself to be treated with such contempt. Besides, Benedict was watching. He couldn't meekly back down. Fine, move aside. He shoved one of the squires aside and plunged himself down. Go on, then. It isn't every day one gets the opportunity to sample the cooking of someone as famous as the Death God.
My stomach has been rumbling since the moment I caught wind of your dish's fragrant scent.
Pax was being defiant now. If Randolph didn't think he'd actually eat the food, then he would do exactly that. He'd guzzle it down, let the poison kill him, and bring chaos to the realm. Obstinate as he was, he'd resolved himself to his fate. Jeez. Oh, you're the first person to ever say something like that to me. Randolph wore an eerie smile as he went on serving the food. The dish was served, stew with enormous chunks of veggies and meat, liquid itself purple. It was worrying. What could make a stew turn that color? It didn't look or smell appetizing. The odor was so rank, it was hard to believe it was edible. Pax's mind screamed that it wasn't food. Just retreat. Pax managed to grab his spoon, but his hand wouldn't move further. The squires present eyed him, their own faces deathly pale. Even Benedict looked somewhat worried. Plucking up his courage, he jammed the spoon in the concoction before him, scooped up unidentified meat, and shoved it into his mouth. After chewing, he swallowed. The squires gawked, and no one present believed he actually tried the dish. Anyone could tell it had to be poison. After a gulp, Pax sat frozen for a few minutes before finally muttering,
"That's surprisingly good. It's seasoned in a style associated with the demon continent, so it likely won't appeal to people around here, but it's palatable to me."
It looked as bad as it smelled. Yet, strangely, once in the mouth, its rich fragrances tickled the nose, and the complex flavors of vegetables lingered on the tongue. The meat was so tender, it instantly melted, filled the mouth with delectable savory flavor. It was a puzzling dish, and Pax had never had something remotely similar in Sharon. As he ate, he noticed a numbness on his tongue. That was likely the poison. But, more importantly, the look on Randolph's face as he ate and complimented the flavor was truly a sight to behold. Pax could tell the death god didn't genuinely think he'd eat it, much less praise it. Even if he died in agony moments from now, he could at least say that he outplayed one of the 7 great powers. He'll be able to brag about it from his seat in hell. Got him! Got him! They're like, "You're dead, dude." But I got him! It's like that technically would be some massive legend for people to be telling in the future. There was still many things Pax wanted to do, but he'd never done anything in his life worth bragging about. So at least he could be proud of this one last act. That gave him some satisfaction.
"I want seconds."
But your highness, I made this for the squires.
"Do you truly believe these men can appreciate the quality of the stew? I'm having it all for myself."
Your highness! The squires were moved as Pax thumped his fist against his chest.
"Enough. What are you gawking at? Do the realm squires make it a habit of staring at royalty as they eat? Or do you have some issue with me eating all of this cuisine for myself? Well, I shan't hear it. If you have any complaints, take them up with your master, Cheryl. Tell him that Sharon's prince robbed you of your chance to sample Randolph's food."
The squires bowed and hastily fled, their expressions full of gratitude. I'm convinced that at least 2 of them are those knights. I mean, even if it's not them, I'm certain they probably had other knights that may have come there. But again, they're squires. Pax didn't care for their appreciation. He assumed that they thought him a gluttonous prince. He then noticed that Benedict had taken a seat beside him, expression placid as ever. Her eyes darted back and forth between Pax and his plate.
"Benedict, do you wish to eat this as well?"
She nodded.
"You understand, don't you? What this food is, I mean."
Again, she nodded. She's willing to go with him now. I was surprised that she didn't later. That's so weird. Well, I mean, later, the offset is probably the fact that she knew that she was pregnant. Pax paused and thought, but almost immediately remembered the crude environment that she found herself in. He was the only friend that she had. She was always alone, spending her time in the gardens, an ostracized, solitary princess of whom no one bothered to interact with. Every day was surely miserable for her. Even Pax wouldn't be able to withstand that kind of treatment. Oof. With that in mind, he found no reason to stop her. Perhaps she decided to join him because he was her only friend. If he died, she may as well too.
"All right then, Randolph. Prepare serving for her as well."
Yes, of course. Ah, what a fine day today is. He smiled as he made another plate. Benedict gracefully took her spoon and began it again. Although she had never been given etiquette instruction, she held her utensils beautifully. She was probably mimicking what she had seen others do. Delicious, Benedict mumbled as she continued eating.
Indeed it is.
Pax resumed his dining as well. Being a voracious eater, he had several helpings before the pot was empty.
Humph. What do you think of that, Death God Randolph? We finished your entire stew. It was delectable.
Yes, it was a great honor to indeed have you both polish off the entire pot. Pax's eyes narrowed.
And when will it kick in?
When will what kick in?
Do you truly think I didn't notice? With a numb tingling on my tongue.
Oh, that. Yes, well, you should notice the effects any moment now. Randolph snickered. Any moment then, Pax thought. He gazed up at the sky, wondering when he last dined outside. Perhaps it was the first time ever for Benedict. No matter how coldly a member of the royal family was treated by their kin, it didn't change how suffocating their life was. If anything, the ostracism meant the family was reluctant to let them outside at all. Instead, confined them into the walls of the palace. That's rough. That's kind of one of those things of like, but they're given everything. They have everything they need. They have food. They have a way comfortable place to live in, safety, everything. Just a probably water to clean themselves with, which is more than most people in the kingdom may have. It's still like just as terrible to be locked up like that. At least his last moments were beneath a sunny blue sky, and he'd eaten a delicious meal before the end. There could be no more pleasant way to go. Feeling more relaxed now, aren't you? Sanshock seeds have a strong tranquilizing effect.
Sanshock?
Yes, it's the best spice for calming one's emotion when they're depressed or irritated. I truly wanted the squires to try it as well.
So it's not poison?
Poison? Oh, well, Sanshock seeds do have a poisonous color to them. Many people tend to avoid consuming them for that reason, yes. But you needn't worry. Not a single soul has perished from eating it. But you mentioning the tingling sensation on your tongue, does that mean you knew I had used Sanshock?
No. I had a feeling you used something, but not quite that.
As Randolph tilted his head, Pax realized he truly intended to treat those squires to a meal. Nothing more. He just wanted to relieve them of all that tension. Poor Randolph. So misunderstood.
Yes, I see. Sanshock. I was almost certain you had taken the skin from a kibbon and added it to the stew.
Oh yes, kibbon skin does make the tongue tingle as well. But you see, kibbon skin can't give the stew that delectable purple hue, now can it?
True enough. Yes, your ingenuity is quite impressive.
I appreciate you saying that. It was worth having that ingredient brought all the way from the demon continent. Randolph's smile seemed to suggest that he had completely seen through Pax's bravado. Pax was unable to withstand the man's penetrating gaze anymore.
Well, enough of this. Benedict, let's be off. I have my studies and magic practice to attend to this afternoon. I have no time to dawdle here, engaging in small talk.
All right. Pax straightened out his shoulders and began to totter off with Benedict close behind. They didn't make very far before Randolph called out, Prince Pax?
What is it?
Randolph sported his usual creepy smile, yet he seemed a bit anxious, rubbing his hands together to work up the courage. Would it be possible for me to serve you a meal again in the future?
Very well. Your cooking is delicious after all.
After delivering this, Pax turned away to leave. While he was anxious about the meal being poisoned, the stew itself was scrumptious. Those unusual flavors were unlikely to suit most people's palates, but Pax had never had anything like it, and he wasn't lying when he said he was a gourmet with finicky taste. Randolph bowed his head and thanked him. After that, Pax began periodically eating Randolph's cooking. Yeah, that is one of those things, like, it now makes sense why Rudeus hated that food so much. Now, technically, he was talking about how, it was King Dragon meat, and so the assumption is the meat's there. But he's probably using a lot of spices and ingredients from the Demon Continent. So it makes sense, again, now, Rudeus is always picky with his food. He's super picky. Unless it's Aisha rice, Rudeus doesn't like it. He only likes the Aisha rice. There's, very few things that Rudeus eats and enjoys. And in most cases, he eats it because it's close to something Japanese. And even then, there's always an issue with it, except for Aisha rice. So, but the one place he had the biggest problem was Demon Continent. That's where he hated it. Especially the turtle meat and stuff like that, hated it. So it makes sense that, when he had food from Randolph, he hated it. It's pointing out right here, it's kind of circling back to that. Yeah, most people over here, again, including Rudeus, it's Demon Continent stuff, spices and ingredients. And it's something that is not going to be for really many people. So, very cool.
In hindsight, I really had resigned myself to death back then.
Pax mumbled as he revisited the distant past in his head. He currently stood on the staircase landing. The nearby window gave a glimpse of the world outside the castle. Fires dotted the landscape, and smoke signals rose like pillars. He heard no voices from here, but he could sense the crowds below. Pax was inside the Shrone Castle, a place he'd arrived after recklessly clawing his way to the throne. I would have preferred not to hear that truth until my dying days. Randolph was standing beside the king and gazing down the world below. He removed his eye patch, and his eye underneath emitted a glaring light. So I guess that's when he brought up the fortification. I was really happy, to hear you say my cooking was delicious.
Don't start that. It may not look appetizing, but I wasn't lying when I said it was good.
It's hard to believe you now, when I now know that you thought that I meant to poison you.
Their voices swelled with emotion as they conversed. Inconsequential happenstance brought them together, and even after their initial meeting, nothing particularly exciting or significant took place. All that happened was that each time Pax and Benedict sampled his cooking, they praised its taste. And that would also make sense why Benedict liked it. It's because she's technically from seemingly a demon race anyways. They would chat a bit while he made his odd dishes, but they'd go their separate ways after. The cycle repeated until Randolph realized how often he was in Pax's company. It would be a stretch to call Pax his pupil or apprentice, but he did offer advice on swordsmanship and magic. Very interesting.
In the end, you and Benedict are my only allies.
They knew that not all the people outside were their enemies. A knight had risked his life to venture out to bring back a scouting report. While not all of them were against him, Pax knew that they weren't his supporters either. That's an interesting way of putting it. And again, that's like go to the later. What happens eventually from this point on, what happened early in the previous chapters, when it came to them trying to talk him down, they were convinced that he was convinced that all that stuff out there was his enemies. No, those are the merchants outside the wall. It wasn't so much the idea that he was saying everybody is against me. It's more of a fact that nobody is for me. That's a big difference there. And he puts it better here in a minute. A vast majority of Sharon hadn't welcomed his ascension to the throne. They could be his enemy under the right circumstances, but never his allies. Again, that's very telling. That's a very telling statement.
Why do people hate me so?
Because you murdered your entire family and all their children? It had been this way his entire life. No one ever allied with him. Except for Zenobia. Perhaps his appearance repulsed them. Perhaps he simply had no talent for finding comrades. Pax honestly had no clue. He had tried his best, his own way. But for all of his efforts, only Benedict and Randolph had come to his aid. Maybe if he conducted himself better, Zenobia and Rudeus, and maybe the knights that had died might have been willing to stand with him. It was too late to reflect on that now. Pax. What's so different with Benedict and Randolph? What was Roxy? What did you do for Roxy? What did you do for Zenobia? What did you do for your father? What did you do for your brothers? What did you do for Benedict? What did you do for Randolph? What did you do for those knights? Benedict, you were there for her. You gave her joy. Randolph, you ate his cooking. You gave him joy. It's sad that it's a realization too late, or not. It's not a realization late. It's a lack of realizing before it was too late. That you worked hard, you pushed, you tried, but only those two individuals out of everybody you listed, you tried to do something for them. Zenobia was going to be your ally, and you didn't do anything for him. That's because he's your brother. And he realized at some point that he cared for his brother. That's the sad thing that, again, is too late to reflect on it. He's trying to figure it out, but he doesn't figure it out. And that's unfortunately probably what leads him to eventually jump. He never realizes. And again, I don't think it would matter. At that point that he's on that balcony, he's just going to be thinking, if somebody were to tell him when he's on that balcony, it's because with Benedict and Randolph, you gave them joy. They wanted to serve you and be with you and support you because you supported them. You gave them something and showed them worth of some type. You never did that for anybody else. You only did what you wanted to do for your own power. Now, again, you can say that if he got rid of the corrupt officials and stuff, he could be doing all that stuff for the people. But was he? That's the question mark. Good question. People are often terrified of me as well, and I haven't the faintest idea why either. Randolph was trying to comfort him. But in Randolph's case, it was no doubt because of his appearance. If only he could do something about his skeletal face and unsettling smile, things might change a little. He's just like Rudeus. That's just my face. That's my smile. He's just like Orsted. That's my face. There's so many people that unfortunately their faces. Poor Randolph. I feel so bad for Randolph. Randolph's great. Still, even with those problems, Randolph had still gained the respect of the King Dragon Realm's High General and numerous swordsmen. Again, because he's a pupil under the King Dragon Realm's General, Shaghal, and he did things for Shaghal. He gave Shaghal something. With a swordsman, probably a lot of it is respect for how skilled he is. It's a respect for his position. But there could be a lot of them that he trained them. He could have trained numerous swordsmen. Or again, it could just mostly be respect. He says respect, obviously. But respect through his skills. Pax had nothing like that. He'd become king, and now had both a wife he loved and an excellent subordinate. But alas, that was no way to run a country. He couldn't win recognition of the masses, and he didn't know how to bolster his supporters. Without comrades, he was now at a loss for what to do. If I was in Pax's position, ooh, those are some nasty shoes. If I was in Pax's shoes, if I was in Pax's shoes, the moment that invasion was happening, get on your horse, Randolph at your side, go to that fort. There would be no better way to gain the support of people than if Pax got on a horse and marched out to battle. There is no, I mean, it's literally in the Pedagogus. Why is Pedagogus so like revered? Because he was on that battlefield. There's nothing that bolsters a people to support their leader more, or a king, a ruler, than to know that they're willing to get out there in the battlefield with the common people. But no, Pax sat in that throne room as people were going out to battle when they were already not comfortable with him being on that throne. There's a good chance that even Jade might support him after seeing him literally defend the kingdom. I doubt it, though. But at least the people would support him. At least many of the knights might, the people of the kingdom might even rise to defend him. And he could come right back with his knights and go right up to that palace. He didn't show his willingness to go out there. And now king typically doesn't have to, because their death would mean the fall of the kingdom. But it's a good way of showing that.
Randolph,
Yes.
when I die, take Benedict with you and escape from here.
Randolph swallowed a breath. In the dozen or so years he'd lived through the numerous battles, never once had another person made him cognizant of his own breathing. But he suddenly found his awareness heightened now.
Go back to the King Dragon Realm when my child is born. Impart them with your swordsmanship and culinary talents. Academia as well. Given the parentage of our child, there's no way they'll appoint him a tutor. I'm entrusting their care to you, and I'd ask you to compliment them as much as possible. I doubt Benedict will be able to do that herself. Neither of us were ever complimented much.
Okay, this answers a couple questions. One being the idea that they're actually planning on having the child born in the King Dragon Realm. And not being assigned a tutor then implies the idea that they will probably be in the royal villa again. So that kind of answered that question. I assume that they could have gone somewhere in the King Dragon Realm, had the child in secrecy. Or, yes, gone into the care of the kingdom again, but then when the child was born, he takes the child and runs, so they don't do something to the child to kill the child. So, yeah, then also additionally, yes, this confirmation here, this is the point where Pax literally tells him, teach him everything, even your cooking. Teach him everything. And additionally, compliment them as much as possible. Benedict won't be able to do that much herself. Neither of us were ever complimented much. So not only is it an issue that Benedict might not be able to express well, she might not know how. I hate back. Shut up. Your Majesty. A rare expression crossed Randolph's face, one he never displayed to others, neither before nor after he became known as the Death God. In fact, after becoming one of the 7 great powers, he killed so many men, tens of thousands of them, that he stopped seeing them as people. In all his many years, he had only made such a face on a select few occasions. This was a look of someone who didn't want the other person to die.
What is it?
You know, I like you. He couldn't bring himself to ask Pax not to die. He was the death god after all. Being the fifth of the 7 great powers, he'd seen countless men die. He'd seen numerous people choose a noble death over a meaningless life. He'd paid his respects to every single one of them. The man before Randolph was a king. He had a stunted body, was unloved by his people, had suffered civil war immediately after his ascension, and would probably be forgotten in the long term, snuffed out from the annals of history. But he was a king nonetheless. He'd done his part to earn the people's acknowledgement and ascend to the throne. It made sense that he wanted to die as a king. His pride compelled him. Again, I'm going to get into this again, but it's like, but your child should take priority. That's the part that hurts the most, and it's the ongoing subject in somebody taking their own lives. It's always, but those around you, and yes, that is a statement where you're literally telling the person to get rid of their own feelings for the sake of those around them. And in a lot of cases, those around them, in a lot of cases, it's something that's forcing them to want to end their life. But again, the ones around him in this situation is, yes, Randolph, which he seems to be of good buddies with him, but Benedict and their child. Forget your stupid pride. Forget your stupid position as king. Get your wife, get your child, and get the hell out of there. And it sucks. It sucks because this is his achievement. And he wants to go down in a burning glory. It sucks. It sucks, dude. That child will never know their father. It sucks. That's why I'll be sure to carry out your order, even at the cost of my own life.
I trust you will.
Randolph Mariani may have been called a death god by others, but a true god of death he was not. This is kind of interesting. He knew of the man who carried the title before him. The former death god would always listen to the words of the dying before they passed. He would honor their dignity and protect it until their last breath. That's why he had come to be called a death god. Randolph had followed his example, because Randolph respected him more than any other and had even inherited his name. The former death god would always listen to the words of the dying before they passed. It's not that they bring death, it's they listen and respect the words of the dying. It kind of lays in the idea of one that will listen to their last words as they go into death, and the idea that they're gonna finish them off. But still very interesting. It kind of implies the idea that it's not so much about the death god is somebody that has to bring death to others. It's just more of a guy that would be willing to respect the dying wishes of somebody that's at the bedside of somebody in their passing. It's very curious. It's just more curious to me because it's trying to go out of its way to say here he's known as the death god, but a god of death he wasn't. Like he's not a bringer of death. It's literally trying to point out, make a distinction here. So I'm very curious if that'll come up again.
Well, it seems the sun is about to set.
Having gotten the answer he wanted, Pax tore his gaze from the scenery outside and headed towards his bedroom.
I'm going to bid my farewell to Benedict. It'll be our last tryst. Will you be sure that no one interrupts us before we are finished?
As you wish, your majesty. Pax disappeared inside his room, and Randolph took up his position outside. After a while, he got tired of standing and went downstairs to fetch a chair. Once he was seated, he propped his elbows against his knees and interlaced his fingers, resting his chin upon them. He kept his gaze locked on the stairs and the window that sat beyond them. It was as though he wanted to burn the sight, Pax's last glimpse of the city he ruled, into his mind's eye. To be honest, I rather wish you wouldn't die, Randolph muttered as he slowly closed his eyes. And that is volume 19. What a depressing end. What a depressing end to the volume. Rudeus breaking down in front of his sisters and his family, and then going on to here with Pax's passing and Randolph not wanting him to die. It's rough. Super rough, but really cool. Really cool. I mean, there's a side of me that's like, I kind of wish that we got this insight before all that other stuff, but it's one of those things of like, you don't really need to know that context because you're supposed to kind of have the same mindset as Rudeus coming in there going, Pax is a dirtbag. Who cares about Pax? I don't feel bad for Pax. Whatever. He can jump, whatever. And then it's kind of one of those aspects of, okay, now you're starting to realize there's a a person hurting here, which is Zenoba, and then you're going right into, okay, seal it more into Randolph, Benedict, and Pax himself. Now, again, I think the most interesting part about this little segment is, yes, it is kind of, it's stamping out most of my theory around the idea of Benedict working for the Man God. But it still could be the case. Like I said, she could have actually fallen for him right here, and then later on, the Man God says, well, do this, or tell him this, and it pushes him over the edge. Could be. But still, very, very interesting to kind of see that kind of play out, because it looks like she legitimately liked him. And he brought joy to her. When nobody else cared about her, he brought joy to her. So again, like I said earlier, the two positives that came from Pax's life right here, it's Randolph and Benedict. But again, I will recognize the fact that Pax did a lot of horrible things, so it's hard to really kind of offset him in a grand scheme of things. But still, important to Benedict, important to Randolph. So, cool stuff. That's the end of the volume. I didn't even think about it. What are we tiering it? What are we putting in the tier? Let me bring up my tier list that I keep telling myself I need to update every single time I do this. Where do we put this? Where do we put volume 19 of Mushoku Tensei? I will say that this volume has a really good later half. For sure has a very strong later half. There's a lot of the stuff that's kind of building up to the war that I think is a little bit rough, but I think because it's so much focus on Zenoba and the question mark as to what he's kind of thinking, it's very curious to me. So what is 19? Again, to recap people, volume 19 is from the point where Zenoba has decided that he is going to go to Sharon. Rui is trying to stop him. I will say that a lot of that stuff was a little bit drawn out, but it's still them trying to stop him, eventually realizing the Man God might be involved. They go to rush off there. Roxy joins them. They have to talk to, Petagoose, get over the Sharon, confront Pax, get sent off to the fort. Rudeus, a lot of that is Rudeus basically experiencing killing firsthand for the first time and mass killing and the regrets from all that kind of stuff. I feel like that kind of stuff got a little bit kind of glossed over, which was a little bit of a loss there. But then kind of going right back in the whole situation with Pax and Zenoba, his thought processes. The biggest disappointment I'd probably say is Roxy wasn't as prevalent in this volume as I thought she was. I had some people whispering here and there like, yeah, you're going to love this volume because of Roxy. And it's like, yeah, she has like 3 really good scenes, but she's not really present. I think this volume is like the cover. It is Zenoba. This is all about Zenoba and Pax. That was at the forefront. Yes, I love the little bit with Roxy and her struggle with, being a teacher and failing Pax and all that kind of stuff. But let's be honest, it's Zenoba's volume, which, again, I love Zenoba. And I think the stuff that Refugin did with Zenoba was fantastic. Because why I like it so much is because I've always been curious about how Zenoba thinks. And I had my fears at some point. If people remember, I think it was around the time they got the Fort Quran. I had some fears that it was going to turn to this thing where Zenoba is going to start cackling and go, I fooled you all. I'm not actually dumb. And even Ginger says that. And I was like, no way they actually do this. No, what it turns into is Zenoba learning the importance of things. And even when he tries to fool Rudeus with the idea of family, he finally discovers family. And he connects these threads in his mind. So it's all consistent to what we've seen that is Zenoba. So where do I put it? I guess an A. It's a high B or A. I think I'm gonna put it in A for now. Again, all this is subject to change once I kind of finish everything and kind of look back at everything. But I think right now, I might stew on it for a little bit. If I change my mind by the next Mushoku Monday, I'll change the position. Like I said before, I need to actually reorganize my entire tier list so I can figure this stuff out. But I think A. I think I'm gonna put it in A for now. So A tier for 19. The volume of Zenoba. So obviously, I think that's the thing. Is like I think that some people said you're going to love this volume. You're just going to love this volume. And then I had some people whisper, because Roxy. But no, what it turned into is this is Zenoba's volume. And we all know that Andrew's best boy is Zenoba. So obviously, it's going to be very high up there just for Zenoba. So again, yeah, the Roxy stuff was great. And Roxy Protect. anyways, that's volume 19. Hope you guys will join me next week for volume 20. We're gonna kick off, starting off that. If I can get into it, like I said, I'm re-recording this, and it's gonna be a late night tonight editing this and getting it ready for Monday, but them's the breaks. But I appreciate your guys' support. Hopefully you get a lot of hearts in the chat to help support me, but thank you guys so much for all your support, all your kind words, all the guys that support the channel monetarily. Everybody that hits the like button. If you're not hitting the like button now for having to do this recording and editing late at night, you're not my friend anymore. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, as usual, greatly appreciate you guys' support through Patreon, tips, links, super thanks, memberships, likes, kind words, all that stuff. It means so much to me. And until the next Mushoku Monday, y'all take care. A knight had risked his life to venture out to bring back a scouting report. Would anyone really reprimand you for wandering a little off from the royal well? I was really happy, to hear. I was really happy.